Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Assalamu alaikum. It's wonderful and not at all surprising to see many people here tonight. Now, before I introduce our august speaker from overseas, on behalf of the Temenos Academy, I'd like to thank Professor Zain Qasim, Director of the Institute of Ismaili Studies, here at the Aga Khan Center, as well as the events team and Chilla in particular, very much for hosting us this evening in their acclaimed building, which fittingly for our subject has several small gardens incorporated within it. Indeed, it's from this institute here that our speaker's magnificent 5-volume anthology of philosophy in Persia was published between 2008 and 2015. And you may have seen copies of this at reception when you came in. Now, most would say that Dr. Nasr needs no introduction, but in preparing for this talk this evening, I was reminded of his truly colossal achievements in the scholarly and academic world. In his long and extraordinarily active life, Dr. Nasr has achieved more in 1 year than most of us achieve in a lifetime. It's truly awe-inspiring. Just to give you a tiny taste, he was born in Tehran and educated in Iran and the United States, earning his Bachelor of Science in Physics from MIT, his Master's in Geology and Geophysics from Harvard, followed by a doctorate in the history of science, also from Harvard. This was all by the age of 25. And at 30 years old, Dr. Nasr was the youngest person to become a full professor at Tehran University. He's published over 50 books and hundreds of articles translated into over 25 languages on subjects ranging from Islamic science, philosophy, art and religion, mysticism, poetry, and the environment, our subject tonight. He also possesses an astonishing memory, giving most of his talks without any notes at all, or on a piece of paper this size, which I've seen once. Dr. Nasr has been hugely energetic in the field of interfaith dialogue, where the heart of his philosophical outlook, his profound belief in the transcendent unity of all religions, is made clear. Currently, he's University Professor of Islamic Studies at George Washington University, a post he's held since 1984, and with his energy will hold, God willing, for years to come. He's not smiling. But above and beyond all these academic accomplishments, Dr. Nasr speaks profoundly and powerfully of the necessity of the transformation of our inner selves. It is only through this metanoia, as they say in Greek, or tauba in Arabic, that we may bring about any change or transformation in our attitude towards our environment. Dr. Nasr was a well-loved friend of both Kathleen Raine, poet and founder of the Temenos Academy, and Keith Critchlow, co-founder of the Academy, and through whom I was so fortunate to meet you all those years ago, Dr. Nasr, at the Royal College of Art in 1989. And in fact, you're one of the very first to be made a fellow of the Temenos Academy. And Keith Critchlow designed this geometric pattern for you. I don't know if you can see it. And you remember it. The Nasr design, he called it, meaning victor, and which was dedicated to you on your 40th birthday, not that many years ago. So many of us owe Dr. Nasr an enormous debt of gratitude, not only for his tremendous knowledge, penetrating intelligence and discernment, but more importantly, his wisdom, spiritual perception, and great kindness, with the sharp sword of truth never far away. And we're especially grateful to you this evening, Dr. Nasr, because I know that you've just returned from a tiring trip in Istanbul, where you gave 2 major public lectures and many interviews. One of the subjects was similar to our subject tonight, the significance of nature in the Islamic tradition. In this Temenos series on sacred nature, our lecturers each focus on this subject from a specific sacred tradition, Without doubt, the foremost voice from the Islamic perspective is our speaker tonight, famous, I would say, for saying, to be at peace with earth, one must be at peace with heaven. It was Dr. Nasr who gave the keynote speech at the first United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm in 1972. His key book, the one I've just shown you, The Encounter of Man and Nature, The Spiritual Crisis of Modern Man, was first published as long ago as 1968 in Iran. And like his friend, our former Prince of Wales and patron of the Temenos Academy, now King Charles III, Dr. Nasr was a pioneer in alerting us to the fast declining state of the natural environment. His focus was and continues to be not only our relationship with heaven, but, and which comes to the same thing, the relationship between our inner selves and the outer world. The inner and outer landscape, as is his beautiful title for his lecture tonight. Please welcome Dr. Nasr, Professor Nasr.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ms. Clark, can you hear my voice?
Yes, we can. Very clearly.
Rabbi Yasser wala Yasser. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to address, although from far away, friends in London, in England, who have assembled here to listen to my humble words. I give very few public lectures these days, but when asked by the Temenos Academy to give a lecture, I accepted readily because it has something to do with the very foundation of this very important academy and intellectual and cultural center that I've created in England. I knew Kathleen Rain very well, and my establishment of the Iranian Imperial Academy of Philosophy was after its demise with the Iranian Revolution, caused Kathleen Rain to create the Temenos Academy, and we spoke oftentimes together. I had a humble role in the very conception of this important institution. I wish it well, and I hope that we will be able to serve not only your country, but people throughout the world with knowledge that is so important for us in this day and age. I also want to thank personally Emma Clark, whom I've known for many decades, who's a very close friend. And I want to express my gratitude to her for all the work that she has done and she's still doing for the Academy and elsewhere. And I'm very glad that I'm able to spend these few minutes on the basis of her invitation with you. Let me begin a little bit with Kathleen Rain. God bless her soul. She was quite a remarkable woman. And this whole issue of the inner meaning of nature and its relation to man's spiritual life was an issue of great concern to her. And we discussed these matters oftentimes together ever since she wrote her seminal book on William Blake. It was before I'd met her personally. I saw in that person an outstanding thinker, not only a great poet, and it was my dear friend, the late Dr. Martin Lings, Sheikh Abu Bakr Sirajuddin, who was a classmate of hers at Oxford, who introduced me to her. And as soon as we met, we became good friends, and we met on so many issues. We agreed except the issue of evolution. And she loved cats like I do. She said, Dr. Nasr, I believe in evolution, Darwinian evolution, but I agree with you on one thing, and that is the cat was born perfect and it never evolved. So at least we met together on one point in this very, very important issue. Anyway, in many ways, this lecture that I'm giving after several decades of not speaking to the Temenos Academy, I've given many lectures to the Academy in London in days of old, is actually, in a sense, dedicated to her memory and what she has left for the English-speaking people and England itself, which is very, very precious. And I'm so glad that there's a whole new generation now of Englishmen and women and Scottish and British all over Great Britain who are devoted to the question of the environment in a serious matter. But since my lecture is about spirituality, the inner and outer landscape, I want to begin by saying a few words about the word spirituality itself, which we now use a great deal, and sometimes I think not correctly. I remember my friend Houston Smith, the great American historian of religion, who once said, religion is out, spirituality is in. You find so many people in the modern world who say, I have no interest in religion, but we're interested in spirituality. As if one could say, I don't like apples, but I like apple juice. But nevertheless, a very common attitude that we face today. Actually, the word spirituality and people who use it and are dedicated to it is a recent event. The word spiritus in Latin, of course, and its equivalent in European vernacular language, l'esprit, Geist in German, and so forth, have a long history. But the word spirituality was not used in any significant way until the 19th century. It's a fairly recent term that has been introduced into Catholic thought and from there entered into other forms of thinking and has become a very, very important term. But for that very reason, there's a great deal of misunderstanding of it. And the misunderstanding is based on the loss of the real meaning of the word spiritus. Spirit is not pneuma. It's not psyche. It's not the psyche. Psychological is not the spiritual. And most of what goes for spirituality today in popular circles and New Age groups in the West really makes the great error of confusing the spirit with the psyche, which is a major, major error. From a traditional point of view, the human being and the world both, basis on the macrocosm correspondence, which we all know about, is made not only of body and soul, we use that oftentimes, but is made of just nafs and ruh in Arabic, corpus, anima, spiritus in Latin. This tripartite division of the human being and of the cosmos, reduced to body and soul, is the great sin of Cartesianism. It was really in the 17th century, in the hands of Descartes and scientifically Galileo and others, that in fact the intellect was in a sense erased from the consciousness of modern man and equated with reason. Intellect is not reason. It's a very different faculty. The reason, in a sense, is a reflection of the intellect upon the level of the mind, but the two are not the same. And the word intellect lost its very, very important meaning in the general discourse that goes on. People oftentimes are called intellectuals without having any sense of the intellect as used by St. Thomas Aquinas or St. Bonaventure, or before that, St. Augustine, the whole great tradition of Western thought, of which the modern world should be heir, but is not to a large extent. Anyway, spirituality is not there only to satisfy the psyche. Authentic spirituality has to do with the spirit. We do not make the spirit, but it is within us. And we have the possibility of having access to it. It's different from our mind, which we can cultivate and strengthen and learn. Spirituality comes from the substance, a substance which has being, as ontological reality that is within us. And once we gain access to it, it both transforms us and our vision of the world. It transforms both the inner landscape and the outer landscape. Once that is lost, gradually the outer landscape also hides, and begins to be forgotten as far as the spiritual aspect is concerned. It hides the spiritual dimension from us. The spiritual man walking in the forest experiences the presence of the spirit. A secularized person merely experiences trees and grass and the sky above. So it's a very important point to note that spirituality transforms our vision, not only of what we are inwardly, but also of what the world is out there, both the inner landscape and the outer landscape. Now, the great impediment to the understanding of this fundamental point, to which also Temenos, to a large extent, has been dedicated to revive in its history of several decades, is that in the general culture of the West, and wherever modernism has spread, Western modernism into other continents and other cultures, nature is seen as a vast machine. It is seen as a machine. Although you might cover it up with various names, it is seen as a machine. And the human body, human being, himself or herself, is seen as a machine. That's why when you go to a modern doctor today, he or she doesn't even look at you. She or he looks at a chart on the wall of your blood pressure and this or that quantitative appraisal of various parts of your bodily function. But you, as a living being, as a being that's integrated, is oftentimes overlooked. It is true that now holistic medicine is rebelling against this. It's one of the very good signs of our times. But still, the prevalent view is that man is a machine. And this goes back actually to the major transformation that was brought about in the 17th century by the rise of modern science. Both Galileo and Descartes were the two most important figures in the rise of modern science. Distinguished between either extension and mind, or res extensa, res cogitans in Latin, as Descartes called it, or primary, secondary qualities, as Galileo called it, and dismissed all that was not quantitative as being subjective. That is, non-quantitative aspects of reality were expelled from the objective world. And so if you have a sense that a tree is beautiful, that is not an objective quality of the tree. It's a subjective appraisal of your soul of the tree. And so the external world was in a sense shorn of all spiritual quality. And nature became an it over which man tried to exercise dominance and power. And this, as far as your England is concerned, goes back to Bacon, Francis Bacon, who said that the goal of science was power over nature. Science meant power over nature, domination. And that domination has led step by step to the suicide that we're now committing now by destroying the natural environment. Now, it's very important for us to understand fully as intelligent human beings, no matter what position, field of life, profession we have, but as intelligent human beings, to understand the process whereby nature as God's creation, as locus of presence of theophany, of a link to the spiritual world, was reduced to a pure it. Nature from a thou became an it, bereft of life, of spirit, of any innate meaning other than the quantitative. It's very, very important to understand this process. It's not for me to do that here. Some of my books have discussed it extensively, like book Religion and the Order of Nature, but I don't want to go over it now, but I have to allude to it. It's very important to be aware of what happened. There are many people, including Muslims, who say the 5 daily prayers, or Christians who go to church on Sunday, But when they come out of a mosque or a church, the world they see out there is dominated by the mechanistic worldview, which began in the 17th century, was in a sense integrated by Newton, who himself was very unhappy about. He did that, by the way. Newton did not believe himself in the mechanization of the world, but his works, the Principia, resulted in that. That world dominates over them, and it's now a global matter. And the spiritual aspect of nature is left for poets and artists to deal with, has nothing to do with science. We have limited the word science to materialistic science, not to scientia, not to sapientia, not to al-ilm, and other words in traditional languages which meant knowledge, organized knowledge. Science should mean organized knowledge, but it has to come to mean this very limited way of looking at reality, which we now identify as science, and any other view is said to be non-scientific. Somebody had decided what is science and what is not science, and the rest of us have to follow. Now, this has a very important history into which I cannot go, but starts actually before Galileo and Descartes in the Renaissance with the rise of rationalism. That is the independence of reason from both the intellect, the divine intellect, the nous, and also revelation. These two sources which transcend the human order, but which illuminate the human order and organize it and give it direction and meaning. It was cut off from that, and so-called humanism arose, and humanism, Renaissance humanism, meant in a sense the independence of man from God. God, in a sense, was replaced by man. Although people still talked about God, people still went to church, but intellectually, that is what happened. This humanism dominated over Western thought and still does, and we believe that only thing is real is what the human mind can understand or human reason can understand, and what we don't understand, someday we will understand, so just wait until new answers come. Now, the consequence of this came late. That is, when Galileo and Descartes were laying the ground for a materialistic quantitative science, the streams of Germany were not polluted. The air in the cities of Europe were not polluted. The earth was still pristine, pure. There were real locations, of course, of garbage thrown out of the city or something like that, but I'm talking about the larger environment. The result came somewhat later. That is why for 2 centuries, while human knowledge and the human beings as an agency affecting upon nature were doing devastating things to nature, there was no result that was negative that people thought about. That's why you don't have environmentalism in the 18th century. Even the great romantic movement in England in the 19th century was trying to discover the beauty of nature. It was on the basis of sentiment, of emotions, not intellection. Wordsworth wrote many beautiful poems in praise of nature, but it's really a sentimental, emotional response, not an intellectual response to the mechanization that had taken place in the European mind concerning the world of nature. It's a very, very important point to detect. In our schools, in our universities, not only in the West, but in the Islamic world itself and elsewhere, in India and so forth, students who are introduced to modern science are not introduced to the process whereby first the modern scientific worldview secularized nature, reduced nature to simply a lifeless dance of molecules, to which then came later on evolution. And so from a ball full of molecules banging against each other, came out Jesus Christ and the Prophet of Islam and Johann Sebastian Bach and Einstein and everybody else were all in that bowl of soup. This is what I said appears absurd, but that's what evolution says ultimately, Darwinian evolution. I know in England it's hard to criticize Darwin because there's nationalistic sort of importance. And even in Australia, you have a city named Darwin, named by the English settlers who went to Australia. But nevertheless, it's important to realize what happened. There would have been no Darwinism without Galilean and Cartesian view of the world of nature. One came after another. And of course, I don't have time in one lecture to say anything about that, but except to indicate it. Anyway, nature caught up. Nature caught up, and gradually there appeared the environmental crisis. In 1953, a woman in New England, Carson, wrote a book because of the streams of New England were becoming polluted, which made some impact, and gradually people began to talk about it. But no one thought deeply as to what was really happening. I hate to say this until I gave the Rockefeller Series lectures in Chicago in 1966, called Encounter of Man and Nature. And Lynn White, who 6 months later wrote his famous essay, The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis, was there in the audience. And he wrote that 6 months later. I won't say copied from me, but anyway, he was present. My big difference with him that he tried to blame Christianity. He tried to blame Christianity completely for the fact that you have the environmental crisis, what he called the ecological crisis. Whereas I believe it is much more complicated than that. There are other elements that were involved. It's true that Christianity, being a way of love, did not provide a revealed, religiously authenticated view of the world of nature. But later on, as Christian civilization grew, certainly created its own cosmology, the medieval Christian cosmology, in which the divine presence is there, and the question of the cosmic Christ, and all of those things which Christian theology develops gradually were formulated. And Christianity had great mystics who were very much interested in the world of nature. St. Francis of Assisi being perhaps the most famous among them, and that's why he's considered the patron saint of the environment now by the Catholic Church. But anyway, it was only after the 1960s that gradually awareness of the environmental crisis came about. I never forget, when I gave those lectures at the University of Chicago, it met with bitter opposition from many Catholic and Anglican thinkers in both England and the European continent and the continental Europe. Who is this man from the Middle East and Muslim telling us the grandeur of Christianity that produced science, it produced modern medicine, it produced airplanes that fly, this kind of thing that no Christian theologian would say now anymore. But I received tremendous criticism because of what I had said. But gradually people began to realize, including Catholics, who changed their position completely. And gradually many important Catholic and Protestant theologians came around who began to realize the importance of the environmental crisis. And however, because Christianity for centuries after the Galileo trial had kept aloof from development of modern science and technology, and because it had identified itself for so long with modern Western civilization, which spread, in fact, a secularist view of nature all the way to China and India and the Islamic world. Because of that, a strange situation developed in which the change to a Christian view of nature became very, very difficult for many. And the first people who took major steps in the environmental movement in the West, in fact, were not Christian. They were usually Swedes and Norwegians. It started in Scandinavia and then spread to Germany and much later to Catholic Europe. The environmental movement in Spain and Italy and France arose much later than in Sweden and Norway and Germany and Denmark and countries like this. It is very, very interesting. I remember once I was in Sweden and giving a lecture on this issue. It was a Sunday, and we went with a number of major Swedish scholars who were interested in the environment. None of them went to church. I said to this Sunday morning, why aren't you in church? We're in a forest. One of them grabbed a beautiful tree like that and said, this is our altar. And this forest is for us, the church. This is very interesting. So there's a kind of a religious element in the early so-called secularist view of the environment and movements that developed on the basis of it. But gradually, of course, the official Catholic Church and also Protestant churches, many of them, not all of them, began to become aware of this issue, and also amongst a number of Jewish scholars in Judaism, an environmental movement began that continues to this day. Now, I believe that it's very, very important to realize that humanism, secular humanism, of necessity leads to dehumanization. If man is not the image of God, he becomes finally image of the machine that he has made. We become the image of our own creation instead of our creator. And that eats into our soul and removes, in fact, this innate relationship that in our normal state we have with nature, with the beauty of nature, with flowers, with trees, with animals. Very few people see a deer and don't appreciate the beauty of its form. But if they just stick to modern science, it's just a biological form that happens to run in the forest. But things have begun to change in a positive way, even with the help of secularists who have rejected Christianity. But now, in addition to that, which marks the origin of the environmental movement in the West, you have now a rise, fortunately, of both Christian and Jewish, Christian, Protestant, and Catholic environmental movement. As for Orthodox Christianity, in Orthodox Christianity, for a long time, because Eastern Europe did not play a central role in modern science and technology, there was less interest in this issue. But the present great metropolitan of the Orthodox Church is also a very good friend of mine. It's called the Green Metropolitan. There's now a very important green movement, so-called environmental movement, within the Orthodox Church, and including a number of British people who converted to Orthodoxy for other reasons, but who are great figures in the discussion of environmental issues in relation to spirituality and religion. Anyway, it's very important, this little discourse I'm giving, to remember that the pollution of our souls came before the pollution of nature. It's the inner landscape that was first polluted before the outer landscape became polluted. When the inner landscape was already polluted by the mechanistic worldview in the 18th century, the outer landscape, to a large extent, still had not experienced the great impact of the pollution that was to come in the 19th and 20th centuries. This is a very, very important issue to realize. That is, the problem begins with us. It's very interesting that the trees continue to grow in the spring. A pear tree still gives pears. An apple tree gives an apple. It is we who every few years vacillate from one position to another, whose soul produce so many different things. We're in such conflict with ourselves. We don't know who we really are, what we are doing, where we are going. And because of this nihilism that surrounds us, we cling to almost anything that we can without really getting to the deep roots of it. I've said often, and Emma Clark bear me out, that in a sense, rebellion against heaven results in the destruction of the earth. This is a very contentious claim. Many people will have opposed me on this, and I'm used to this. But what I mean by that, rebellion against heaven, is that once you reject the spiritual world in its ontological reality. I don't mean just with the psychological world called spiritual, the real spiritual world, the world of spirit, of revelation, of noetic knowledge, of illumination, of transformation of our being by the light that shines at the center of our heart. Once we reject that, humanism results in the destruction of the earth. From a Sufi point of view, tradition to which I belong, one of the roles of man in this world is to be a light for the world of nature. Man is like, as the Sufis have said, like the window of a house through which the light of the sun shines into the whole house. Once that window is darkened, the whole house becomes darkened. It's an image that I want to leave with you. That is our neglect of the spirit within us and the objective spirit, which ultimately is the divine Geist, divine spiritus. Once we negate that, in a sense, the darkness of our soul reflects through our actions, through our doings, through our thoughts, in the ambience around us. No creature in the world, no matter how big like an elephant, how dangerous like a rattlesnake, can destroy the balance of nature. Only we can do so. Only we can do so. And this is itself a sign that we are not only an animal. No animal can destroy the ecology of the world, but we can. We can. And that itself is a sign of our representing the divine reality in this world. In the Islamic terms, I've said so many times, al-insan, the human being, is at once Khalifatullah, the vicegerent of God on earth, and Abdullah, the servant of God. Modern man, as I've said so often, wants to be Khalifatullah, wants to be God's caliph on earth while you're forgetting God, but refusing to be God's servant. And that is the most dangerous of all things. No other creature claims for itself to be Khalifatullah. But we're claiming, if I can use Islamic language, to be Khalifatullah without the other half of our reality, which is also to be Abdullah. That is, we have the power to destroy. We can also, of course, build, we can make, but the power to destroy, which become more dominant as we see in the world around us. We have the power to destroy. The moment that there's no reign upon the passions of our soul, that what the theologians have called the devil, evil, and original sin, according to Christianity, hubut or fall, and man, according to Islam. I will not get into all those differences, but the reality is the same. Once we forego the knowledge and awareness of who we are, we destroy the home which God has made for us, that is the earth. There's no way of avoiding destroying the earth once we forget that, in fact, this is not our only home. The purely earthly man is the man who's destroying the earth. The spiritual man always thought he was here on a temporary visit, that there was another world, was another part of the journey of life beyond death. Whereas secularized man believe this is his home. This is only home. We're only earthly creatures. Once we do that, we destroy our home, which is what we are doing right before our eyes. I will sit here right now, my lecturing to you, how many species have disappeared from the world or are about to disappear? Species. How many? You all read about it and you know about it. So I want to turn to, for the last part of the lecture, to what do we do? What do we do in this situation? First of all, a wonderful saying, Chinese saying that I always like to quote, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. A single step is to do something about ourselves. in the environmental field, one should think globally, but act locally. Yes, we must think of the whole globe, of the nexus of things, of interrelation with a butterfly flying in Japan on airwaves reaching California, which has been studied as a matter of all the remarkable interrelatedness of the world about us. And we, in a sense, have a responsibility for the whole globe in that sense. However, we cannot act on the whole globe. We can only act where we are. That's single step is from where we are. We can never take a step anywhere except from where we are. And so where we are, we have to correct. We have to be aware. We have to be responsible. In the same way we feel responsible to traffic laws, to taxation laws, to supporting our wife and children, to eating and sleeping and so forth, we must feel this responsibility towards the world that sustains us. We can no longer take it for granted. And I want to add here, for those who are beyond the Western world and listening to these lectures, because our lectures go all over the world, one of the most tragic events that is taking the world today is that many people in the non-Western world make the following false argument, saying that while the West was getting rich and polluting the world, nobody said anything. Now it's that our turn to get rich. Then the West tells us, don't do this, don't do that, don't pollute the Volga River or some river in India and so forth and so on. Why not? Now it's our turn. Let us also get rich, then we'll talk about it. This is a remarkable suicide, the whole idea that unfortunately is very prevalent, including my own country. I gave numerous lectures in the old days when I lived in Iran on this issue. And many people who are people of a really good faith, they believed in their people, they believed in goodness, they thought that somehow the West will solve the problems. The important thing for us is to gain wealth and power like the West has, so the West doesn't dominate over us anymore. This is the unfortunate political, social reality that we have to confront. You cannot say that if we're all in the same boat, that one side of the boat is sinking, they said, all right, we'll do the same, drain a hole also on our part, we'll all be saved together by the second boat that will come along and save us. That's not going to happen. That is not going to happen. Everything that we do to the environment, in a sense, can be global without our knowing it. If we pollute the Hudson River, its pollution reaches all the way to Europe. It's been measured. It's been measured. Every act that we perform has a reaction in the ecological world far beyond what we can imagine. We're affecting now the internal organs of fish below the sea, of birds flying in the sky. How many of you are now refused to buy fish, certain kind of fish, but they're polluted? We're polluting our own source of food through adding all these chemicals, all these artificialities that we're adding. And so the problem of the environment hovers over us as an all-important problem. I believe that good engineering is not enough. It's not a question of engineering. It's a question of changing our Weltanschauung, our worldview. The worldview that has dominated Western man since the rise of modernism and the Renaissance has resulted in these catastrophes. I'm not even talking about 90 million people getting killed in the Second World War, more than all the wars of history. I'm not talking about overpopulation or all these things that are consequences of modernism. I'm talking about actually what is happening now. We have, in a sense, polluted the world through the idea we can engineer everything to human benefit. And so with good engineering, we can remove the effects of bad engineering. Yes, on a smaller scale, yes. We can make cars give off less poisonous gas by fixing the motor. Yes, having electric cars. But that's not going to solve the major problem. The major problem is much deeper than that. It's good to do the little things that we can do. I'm not against that. I'm very much for it. But that's not going to solve the major problem. The major problem is that we have to change our worldview. We have to change the view of what we think we are, where we come from, what are we doing here, where are we going. Unless we change that, we'll be a very unhappy creature who tries to find happiness in worldly things which are transient, and we'll have very little power to withstand all the tragedies of the world that, in fact, the world presents to us, where the world is always the world, it's not God, and looking for perfection on a level of reality where it does not exist. And the key to all of that is to rediscover the inner landscape, to purify it, to remove the pollution from within ourselves, within our mind, within our intellect, within our hearts, within our soul, from the world of ethics to that of metaphysics, to purify the inner landscape. And also, having done so, to be able to see that we have a responsibility for the outer landscape. Yes, nature shall have the final say. I would say jokingly, with all these storms going on in the United States, to American friends, it says that song that you sing in America, anything you can do, I can do better. Nature is telling us, if you can destroy the earth, I can do a better job. I can do a better job. And nature will have the final say. No matter how powerful our factories and modern science and so forth, nature shall have the final say. And so the important thing is to have another view of what nature is, what that outer landscape is. Nature is not only force and matter. It's not the Cartesian and Galilean world. Nature has a soul. It has a spirit. It has, except we who do not have the right ear cannot hear its voice. I, being a Persian, can never lecture without at least quoting one Persian poem. Great Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi says, Kash ki hasti zabani dashti, ta za hastan pardaha bardashti. If only the world of existence had a tongue, so it could lift from existence the veil. Every creature actually is alive. It prays to God. Its very existence is a theophany, ultimately. And we are placed here on earth with the great gift of being able to know that. We are only people who reflect all of God's names and qualities from an Islamic point of view. Not one name, but all of God's names and qualities. And this privilege brings with it responsibility. Let's not forget what the word response means. It means there has to be something to which you respond. The RE means again. So there is a reality. Responsibility comes from a reaction to that reality which has made it possible for us to respond. That is to the divine reality, the cosmic reality which God has created, which surrounds us. Whether we like it or not, we're surrounded by a world which we did not create, whose laws we cannot change. We can change mechanistic things that we make, and machines that go fast and so forth, but we cannot change the laws of nature. The 1/r² law that Newton discovered cannot be changed by any scientist. They don't talk about it as being divinely given, but from a theological point, there's a divinely given law for that part of reality. We must expand that to realize that the laws that govern the universe, that govern us, and therefore, to break those laws, ultimately, we have to pay for. And the discovery of our inner landscape is not a selfish act. In fact, it's the most selfless act that we can possibly do, because to discover the landscape is to go beyond the self as ego, as nafs, to transcend this little bubble with which we identify ourselves, And by transcending that, we realize our affinity with the cosmos out there, with all the creatures of the world, to whom then we have a sense of responsibility, as a responsibility towards God. And to realize that, especially for religious people, our responsibility is not only towards God. It's not only to say 5 times of prayer a day or go to church every Sunday. It's also responsibility to our soul and the responsibility to the cosmos and the creatures in the cosmos. There are 3 responsibilities we have: to God, to our inner self, and to the outer landscape, to the cosmos itself. I hope very much that lectures like this, attended by you from far away, and I've come far away to lecture to you, will inshallah help in some way to awaken us all to a reality which is absolutely essential to realize, and without which our grandchildren would no longer be able to live on the earth which God has created for us. Thank you very much.